Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast, brought to you by the podcast. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. And we're a little bit behind this week. Andrew had a little sickness. He was out of town. We're trying to catch up. So we didn't have anything up to date when Jeremiah McClellan committed on Sunday, as we expected that he would, Andrew. But because we are in such a unique time in the recruiting world, even a recruitment that felt for months to be sort of assumed, like Jeremiah McClellan's was, there's always this like sneaking, creeping fear at this point for Ohio State that maybe something is going to come up and bite you right at the end. And at least to now, Ohio State has avoided that with Jeremiah McClellan. And I think it's a pretty important recruitment for Ohio State, especially after essentially letting the Elijah Moore recruitment go towards Florida State as they did after his official visit in June. The Buckeyes need 4 wide receivers in this class, I think, and Jeremiah McClellan has been the slot guy that Brian Hartline and the Ohio State offense have had circled for a while. So, what did you make of the way that went down in the last few weeks ahead of a commitment?
So yeah, you mentioned it. We've seen some of those recruitments where someone kind of sneaks in at the last minute and kind of surpasses Ohio State. Glad to see that didn't happen this time, whether it have been Oregon or Missouri. I think when you consider the new NIL stuff in Missouri about, high school students being able to take NIL money as long as they're enrolled or registered or whatever to an in-state school, like that kind of makes this all the more impressive for Brian Hartline to pull this one out, I think. I think he's just a great compliment to Jeremiah Smith and Milan Graham, probably an inside guy, kind of a physical guy. I think for a while we kind of were looking at 3 for the class. Now it's seeming more and more, kind of like you said, it's probably going to get up to 4. But just another big win for Brian Hartline, who seemingly gets whoever he wants on the recruiting trail these days.
Yeah, the comparison I got from people around the Ohio State program for Jeremiah McClellan is Curtis Samuel. And I think that's interesting because we think about Samuel as such a dynamic athlete, the way he was used out of the backfield for Ohio State, but he is a receiver in the NFL. And if you look at McClellan, the size, 6'1", about 195 pounds, he's pretty solidly built for a high school wideout. And he's not the burner type. He's not like a 4.3 guy, but he's going to be sub 4.5 by the time he's making any impact in the college level. And he's physical. He catches the ball really well. Extremely quick in short space stuff, and that's why I think you look at him as an inside guy, but he doesn't have to be. He's a guy that can play on the outside as well, does that for Christian Brothers College High School, which, as many people know, is the alma mater of Cam Babb and Cameron Brown. So Buckeyes did have a little insight there. But you bring up a great point, like the fact that Missouri has set up this NIL loophole where if you're committed to and not just committed, you have to have a financial aid agreement signed with an in-state college. That you can begin collecting your NIL money at that point. It's weird to me that like that 4 months matters that much to a lot of kids, because there obviously is going to be on the backside of that, if you wait until you sign, a lot more at places like Georgia, for example, which is where Williams and Winari, was considering, other than Missouri. But Missouri also is still very much in the running for Ryan Wingo, a 5-star wide receiver. And when you couple that with like the success they had recently with Luther Burden, with getting Mookie Cooper to come back home, with a lot of this other stuff that they're doing, like it doesn't feel like it should have been that easy for Brian Hartline. But after the spring visit for Jeremiah McClellan that he made in April, like it was never really close until the last few weeks when Oregon and Missouri started to make a different sort of approach. But again, as you said, like for Brian Hartline, the fact is we pull our hair out thinking about all the stuff that Ohio State coaches are dealing with on the recruiting trail, but yet none of it seems to affect him. And it's puzzling how he does it so well. And I think in some ways, like it really is being like coupled with the success of the current receivers, but it's also the message that those receivers are giving these recruits when they get to campus, which is this is not fluff. This is happening because Coach Hartline is getting us there. And I think they really buy into that.
Yeah, no, you're spot on with that. And it's exactly why you can see a recruitment like the Jeremiah Smith one, where he's just got that relationship built and the kid can go and visit every single Florida school multiple times. And regardless of what the Florida State guys say or the Florida guys say, that Heartline and Ohio State just continue to feel like they're in a good spot for who's probably the best player in the country, regardless of position. So it's impressive.
Yeah, the Jeremiah Smith recruitment, we are obviously going to talk about all the time from here until signing day. You see reports earlier on Wednesday that he's got multiple visits to Florida State planned. And I know people are going to get concerned. They're going to wonder why this is happening. I've been trying to think of the right analogy all day to talk about this, but I'm struggling to do it. But let's say you have like a favorite Mexican restaurant that you've gone to, that you've wanted to be at your whole life. Every time you go there, you have the best Mexican food you've ever had, right? And it's amazing, but you can only get there like once every 6 to 8 months, okay? And you're like, man, I really want some Mexican food, but I can't make it to my favorite spot because it's, let's say, I don't know, 18 hours away, right? But then there's Taco Bell, okay? And Taco Bell is down the street. And while Taco Bell is certainly not the best Mexican food you've ever had in your life, it will satisfy that urge you have for a taco every once in a while, right? But couple that with the fact that every time you go to Taco Bell, they give you bags of money. Like, wouldn't you just show up there more often and then still be like, but that doesn't change the fact that your favorite Mexican restaurant is still the one that you want to go to, but you just settle sometimes to go to Taco Bell because it's there. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on Taco Bell are that I do not like Taco Bell, but if it were a situation like you mentioned where you could go there and maybe get a little,
your favorite fast food Mexican place, whatever it is.
I know. I've always been a Taco Bell hater at heart, so I'm not going to change my ways now. But no, you're exactly right. If you could go there and, maybe get a little bit on top of the chili cheese burritos or whatever you're going to order from there, I can see why that would be appealing for someone who, especially when their proximity is what it is in the Smith situation with those other schools. So I get it.
It's just down the street and you just love tacos and you love going to talk about Mexican food. And then you go there and they give you a watered down version of the chalupa that you're looking for, but they also give you a giant bag of money. Like, it's hard to turn that down.
Yeah. And then Taco Bell has these people that cover Taco Bell who always want to talk to you about
people, right?
The infamous Taco Bell PR people who then immediately want to hit you up as soon as you're walking out the door from Taco Bell to ask you how it was. So you've got to tell them.
Yeah. You never leave Taco Bell feeling immediately bad. It doesn't hit you till like 2 hours later, So like at the moment you're in your post taco glow and you're thinking to yourself, man, I just had some tacos, crushed some tacos. And then you get home and you're like, okay, but it's still Taco Bell. It's not the Mexican restaurant I love to go to with my family and have been dreaming about going to for years. So I don't know, man. I think that the bottom line is Brian Hartline has been so good that the recruitments like Jeremiah McClellan's, like Jeremiah Smith's, like eventually Chance Robinson's, who I think has the best chance of being, no pun intended, the fourth wide receiver in the Ohio State recruiting class, currently committed to Miami. I would be expecting him to take an official visit at sometime in October or early November. And if that happens, I think he's a guy that you could look at it as that potential fourth wideout in the class. It's weird because I just don't see Brian Hartline as the type to go out and really get someone in the transfer portal. It doesn't seem like his MO. He wants to recruit and develop these guys from the minute, from their high school years. So it is interesting that Ohio State has not yet become sort of that secondary school for receivers who are wanting to take that next step up. But maybe this is the cycle that happens if Chance Robinson decides to stay committed to the U, I guess. So that's what it is. Ohio State also, I know people will scoff at it, but they picked up a long snapper this week as well. Morrow Evans is his name. He's from the same high school as Donovan Jackson outside of Houston in Bel Air, Texas. And it's a preferred walk-on spot, but he is the number 2 ranked long snapper in the country. He's an All-American. And one thing Ohio State's continued to do well is to recruit specialists who understand the assignment. I mean, you think about, I know I'm going to end up jinxing ourselves here now, but when was the last time Ohio State had a bad snap on a kick or a punt? It's been a long time, right? So it's important that you go out and get these guys. When Morrow Evans made his commitment on Sunday, I had a couple people from inside of the Ohio State program reach out and say, hey, this kid matters to us. He's someone that we were actively recruiting. He visited in the spring. He came up and visited again for the July 28th Summerfest at the shoe thing. So like it was clear he was a priority because they wanted to make sure he was back on campus in the summer and get this locked up. He is a kid who will have offers from schools for full scholarships, but he's choosing to redshirt at Ohio State and then go on scholarship in his mind. And the plan is next year, but not right now. So he's not going to count as a commitment on the Ohio State commitment list at rivals.com or anywhere else, but he will eventually be a scholarship player. So he is a pretty important piece of the puzzle for the specialist room. So I don't want to dismiss it outright. And, people, again, will scoff and say, oh, it's not a big commitment. But you know what? You have to have guys who can do that job, because I'm a Cincinnati Bengals fan, and Andrew is too. And we remember a game a year ago where the Bengals lost their long snapper in the first game of the season because he tore his bicep, and then they lost, and because they couldn't snap the ball and kick extra points. So that was weird. And I don't think I'd ever really thought about a long snapper like extensively until that game. But now you have nightmares about it.
Yeah,
nightmares.
I'm not ready to talk about that one, but yeah.
I mean, it's cool, but hey, those are the recap. That is the recap of the last couple of days in Ohio State recruiting. And now let's get to the previews, because this is what people are wanting to know about, I assume. Eddrick Houston, the 5-star defensive end, probably maybe a 3-tech. I don't know exactly what he's going to be. He's a big 6'4", 275-pound defensive lineman who has a crazy motor and extremely skilled. He's making his announcement on Monday or Tuesday, the 22nd. And that will be between Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, Georgia. That's the primary group. USC also had an official visit from him. And this one, it's eerie because it's so quiet that nothing is being said around it. And so, again, in a normal world where Ohio State fans and Ohio State circles realize that Ohio State is one of the 2 or 3 best programs in the country, you wouldn't sit there and be biting your nails the whole time. But because we're living in bizarro world, everyone is probably on pins and needles wondering, okay, when's the other shoe going to drop? What is Ohio State not going to handle this? Are they not going to close at this point? And again, I feel sometimes like people get annoyed when I say at this point, because things can change between now and next Tuesday. But it is really hard to see this going any other way than Ohio State. There's been nothing but positive things said about Ohio State. There's been no real legitimate contender that has emerged in the last 8 weeks since his official visit. He did not make a visit anywhere at the end of July, like a lot of people were speculating that he might return to Alabama or visit Clemson. That didn't happen. I think that this is one that's going to end up in Ohio State's favor, and it can't be understated how freaking important it is to land Eddrick Houston in this class, because if you have Eddrick Houston and you couple him with Justin Scott on the defensive line, you have 2 5-stars, and then you can figure out edge rushers that are like the stand-up edge rushers, whether that's Booker Pickett, whether you go out there and you recruit someone like Dominic Kirks in the state, whether you continue to push for Marquise Lightfoot or take another swing at Dylan Stewart, et cetera. You got to have these 2 pieces in place. Otherwise, the defensive line class becomes a serious, red circle, red alert, high freak out freak,
Yeah, if Ohio State misses on Eddrick Houston, I think that's a borderline catastrophic miss for the 2024 class. And you said it, it's been eerily quiet for the last, month and a half or so. And I think that kind of feeling among the fan base is, are we going to wake up next Tuesday morning and see a bunch of future casts or crystal balls or whatever switched from Ohio State to Alabama, assuming Alabama's the biggest threat right now. But yeah, it seems like all signs continue to point to Ohio State. It's been a quiet recruitment. He doesn't talk a lot. I think I read something where he said he's known his decision for a while now, which that leads me to believe that that's probably a good thing for Larry Johnson and Ohio State as well. But yeah, if you can start a defensive line class out with Eddrick Houston and Justin Scott, it doesn't get a whole lot better than that. Throw in a Dylan Stewart, that would look great too. But yeah, get him and then keep swinging for Lightfoot and maybe keep swinging for Dylan Stewart, one of those pure defensive end types, and you're in a good spot.
If you're looking for a reason to feel confident it's what Andrew just said. This is decidedly different than some of these other recruitments that have happened in the last 2 months, in that Eddrick Houston has said publicly he's already told his parents his choice. He's already made his decision. He's just waiting to announce it on the 22nd. So while a teenager certainly has the right to change his mind over the course of a week, if nothing has changed in the big picture of his recruitment since official visits finished, it seems difficult to believe that his decision will be changed between now and then. And again, you can't take anything for granted at this point because we live in such a weird time with college football recruiting. But I think you can feel reasonably confident that on Tuesday he's going to pick Ohio State. And even by saying that, I know some people will be like, no, we don't want to be confident. We want to be panicked. But I don't think it's necessary to panic in this situation. You just don't panic until Tuesday, wake up on Tuesday and then panic, because otherwise you're just panicking for 5 days for no good reason. That's not good for you. It's not good for your mental health. It's not good for your physical health. Stress kills people. Stress kills.
Have you kind of gotten the vibe? Are they recruiting him as a straight defensive end, or is it just like defensive lineman? You're going to be Adolphus Washington, Draymond Jones, one of those types. Is that kind of your vibe?
I think the idea is to see if you can maintain the frame in the same way that JT Tuimoloau's frame has maintained. When JT got to campus, he was in that 6'4.5" range, 6'5" and 270, and people said, "Oh, he's going to get too big. He's going to get to 295, 300, and he's going to move inside." And JT has done a great job of handling his weight and making sure that he stays on the edge. And I think that the goal is to have Eddrick Houston do the same thing. Now, his body type is slightly different than JT's, and so it might be a little bit harder to keep that weight or redistribute that weight the way that JT has, but that is the goal. But that said, one of the things that makes JT Tuimoloau so important for Ohio State is his versatility and the way he can move inside or outside. But you want to take his strength and his quickness and use it on the outside against tackles, and that is 100% the goal with Eddrick Houston. So it is provided that he commits on Tuesday. He's a guy that will enroll in January, and then Mick Marotti will have a chance to figure out what the best body type is. And we've seen him listed some this summer at like 280 already. That will give people pause, but that's in the summer months. And once you get into the season, he's going to be playing at 267, 270, and so I think that's where he wants to be, and that's where Ohio State sees him.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then if they do get him, like I said, just the next step is going to be defensive ends, like pure defensive ends, whether it's Lightfoot or whomever else, or maybe somebody emerges this fall, because they need 4 to 5. Is that kind of the number we've been saying all along for the defensive line? Yeah,
I mean that seems almost imperative at this point. You have, if we're looking at the totality of the roster, obviously JT Tuimoloau will be gone after this year on the edge. He's the only edge rusher that I think you can put it in ink that he's gone after this year, because Jack Sawyer will have to have a pretty big year to put himself in the position to get drafted high enough to take that leap. Caden Curry will be coming back for his third year. Kenyatta Jackson will come back for his third year. Omari Abor, provided he gets back healthy from his second major injury, he'll be back for his third year. And so you are looking for probably 3 defensive ends in this class, I would imagine. I think you can find one of those in the transfer portal if Ohio State's going to be aggressive, and I've been told that their plan is to be much more aggressive in November and December in the transfer portal than it had been previously. So you can sort of find a complement there, but Ohio State still wants to build through the high school ranks, and so it's about finding someone that can take care of that for you. We talked at length about Booker Pickett on the last talking stuff, but again, I think he's a jack / linebacker / pure edge rusher, not a guy that's going to be able to put his hand in the dirt and play that way. So you're going to have to find someone else out there. My personal preference, and I know one of the questions over at OhioState.Rivals.com is there anyone that pops up? I really believe Dominic Kirks from the Cleveland area should be recruited by Ohio State. I think he's that type of guy. I still have not heard anything that would lead me to believe the Buckeyes are circling back on Brian Robinson or anything like that. So Dominic Kirks is committed to Washington. He's committed to a pretty good program. It's just strange to me that there's been virtually no contact between him and Ohio State, and I don't know why. So don't know why. But that's it for Eddrick Houston. Bottom line, I think it seems pretty positive for Ohio State. It's been positive. There has not, in the KJ Bolden recruitment, for example, or the Dylan Stewart, there were those key points along the path where you check in and you go, well, I don't quite feel as good as I felt before, or we're starting to worry a little bit. There hasn't been those sort of discussions yet about Eddrick Houston, so I think that's where that positivity should remain, even though Brass Tax or something in the comments says that there's no way Eddrick Houston is choosing Ohio State next week. So Brass Tax, I challenge you to this. If Eddrick Houston picks Ohio State, I'd like you to make a $100 donation to the charity of Andrew's choice. Deal? Okay.
Yes.
There we go. He has not responded, but I bet he will. I hope that he does, because I'm sure you have a really good charity in mind. Let's move on to the other thing that people get freaked out about: offensive linemen. So I still think Ohio State is the favorite for Brandon Baker, and I don't care what everyone says. That said, I did talk to a couple sources in the Woody this week, and they acknowledge that they have felt a slight surge from Texas in the last week and a half, but that what they're being told from the Baker side of things is still overwhelmingly positive, and so they're not getting antsy about it yet. That being said, it is very difficult to not see the recruitment of Brandon Baker and Jordan Seaton coming down to how high is Ohio State willing to go in the NIL battle. And this has been sort of that speed bump that we watched happen in the KJ Bolden fight. At some juncture, you have to think or believe or hope that Ohio State, knowing that they had allocated resources for Bolden, for Stewart, would just decide, hey, you know what? We're going to dump it into this pile over here. I don't know if they're willing to do that. The same reluctance that said, let's not have KJ Bolden be the highest paid player on the roster is naturally still there when it comes to two offensive linemen like Jordan Seaton and Brandon Baker. But there is, I think, in my mind anyway, like offensive linemen of that physical nature, of that elite status, of that absolute potential to contribute early in their careers, 3-and-out guys, like they're so rare that I think you have to be willing to entertain that thought, because if you don't, how do you ever win these battles ever again? And, we talked about it last week, Andrew. This is going to happen eventually for Ohio State, and I'm of the mindset that if something's going to happen eventually, it may as well happen right now.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Take what you had allocated for those other guys, Bolden or Dylan Stewart, and just throw it all into the offensive line bank account there. That's what I'm doing, and I would love to see them do that. I do think some of the Texas talk for Brandon Baker is concerning. I think Jordan Seaton seems a lot more open right now than what Baker is. It seems like Baker's down to like maybe 3 or so schools, whereas Seaton's got a lot more options out there. But
yeah, Ohio State has good or bad. Like, I'm trying to figure. I totally agree. But my question is, at this point in the process, we're 2 weeks away from the start of the season. Is it good that a player is wide open and entertaining Oregon, Alabama, Miami, South Carolina, etc., or bad that they're entertaining those schools? Is it good that someone's narrowed down to just basically Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, or is it bad that someone's narrowed down to those schools? Like, I don't know if it's apples to apples or the same thing, but like, to me, I think I'd rather have a guy that was going into these next 3 weeks with a decision in mind, as opposed to somebody saying 3 months from now, let it all ride, I'm open to all comers. Like, I think that's a little bit scarier.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think Baker's probably one of maybe the most important target left in the class right now behind Eddrick Houston. He's, a pure tackle, whereas Seaton's looked at as more of a guard. But I don't know. They have a good offensive line class right now. Obviously, a strong class in the state of Ohio has helped. And then you got Ian Moore over in Indiana. But if you can add in just that elite tackle type, I mean, that takes your offensive line class from really, really good to like maybe even elite. So I think Justin Fry needs to do whatever he can to make that happen. So we'll see.
Think if you add Brandon Baker and Jordan Seaton to this offensive line group and to this offensive group in general, it is the best offensive line class in the country without question. And it might be the best single class of offensive talent Ohio State's ever had, which is saying a lot, considering how many great players have come through in the last 15 years. So I think you have to figure out a way to make that happen. Now, the question is, as I said, how far are you willing to go? Because that is the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. And I guess with Seton, like we've been talking about Baker for months now. We hadn't really talked about Seton much until the last time we were on here, and you kind of threw his name out there as a renewed interest type. Like, what's changed there? Is just like Ohio State's, because they've got the commits doing their thing now. Jeremiah Smith's all over him on social media, and there's certainly a big push. Is like been some big change, or did Justin Fry just wake up one day and say, "Hey, this guy's pretty damn good. Let's go and do what we can"?
At the risk of like opening up a can of worms about someone's personal life or whatever, I will say that Ohio State had decided to slow things down and reevaluate and reassess and make sure that the fit was right from a personality standpoint and an off the field standpoint. And after a few months of research and having conversations, they came back around and said, "Hey, we're willing to take this chance." And that is fair. I mean, I think that's how a good program should operate. You should not just take any player in the country, regardless of off the field potential issues or on the field issues or whatever. So you have to keep doing your homework. And I think there will be some who say, well, Ohio State thought maybe they could get someone else, but it's not like they've had any other guards circled in the last few months. It's really just been a decision where the relationship with Jordan Seton and Justin Fry has stayed steady. And the rest of the checkups came back okay, I think. And so they've decided to go full speed ahead again. I do not buy into, Jordan Seton putting OH on his Instagram profile as a sign that he's leaning toward Ohio State. But I said it last week. I'll say it again. Like, the Buckeyes are very much in this again, and they were not in this 2 months ago. So he told me personally that he thought like his top group was like Alabama, Oregon, Miami, Ohio State. And that was then we've seen this push from South Carolina after the Dylan Stewart commitment. So there's a lot of moving parts, but he's going to visit in October. And then you just hope that you get a chance to really impress his whole family with everything you have going on at Ohio State. So Greg, who is the highest paid NIL player currently? I have no idea. That's not information that anyone has given. Obviously, we heard a lot of rumors about Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee getting upwards of $8 million a year ago, but that's over the course of his 4 years. So we'll see. That's just the direct amount from the collective, not necessarily what he's gained or found in other areas. So we will move on and move up. Aaron Noland, now the number 3 ranked quarterback in the country, according to the consensus rankings, behind Dylan Raiola and Julian Sayin. 5-star at rivals.com now. And are you shocked, Andrew, by this? Or is this just what we should have expected the minute that he committed to Ohio State?
The minute he committed to Ohio State, there were people complaining, saying, now that he's committed to Ohio State, he's going to shoot up the rankings. And part of that's fine because Ryan Day and Corey Dennis, they know what the hell they're doing. But this is a kid who plays against elite competition, puts up elite numbers. He's got solid measurables. He's really got everything you look for in a 5-star quarterback. I think if there's like one knock on him, it's maybe that his throwing motion and his delivery is a little bit wonky still. But I mean, the kid's a winner, and he plays against elite competition, and he's playing against elite competition on Friday at 6:00 on ESPN2 when he faces Julian Lewis, who's maybe the best player in the 2026 class. Is that right?
He's the number one ranked. He's the number 1 ranked quarterback and number 1 player in the class of 2026 at Carrollton High School. That is going to be a hell of a game to watch. If you're into watching high school football on a Friday night, you should find ESPN2 and watch that game because Langston Hughes versus Carrollton will be a doozy. Langston Hughes went 15-0 a year ago. Aaron Noland led them to a state championship, the first one in their school's history. And now you're looking at a kid who entering his senior season with a lot more pressure and expectations on him than he had going into his junior season. The funny thing about the Noland thing is that you're right. Like, as soon as he committed to Ohio State, there were 2 factions. There was the, he needs to be ranked higher because he's committed to Ohio State. And then there's the, I can't believe they're going to make him ranked higher because he committed to Ohio State. But he's earned it. He went and competed at the Rivals Camp Series, the Elite 11, did all, shined and showed up at big time ways in each of those settings. And he's obviously got the film to match, and now heading into a senior season. Ohio State's got a real damn good quarterback coming in the class of 2024. And I can't imagine 8 months ago when Dylan Raiola decommitted that anyone would have thought that Ohio State's replacement for Raiola would end up being this close to him in the rankings. But here we are. He's now number 3. And I have no qualms with Raiola or Julian Sand being 1 and 2. I would probably, based on junior film, flip those and have Sand number 1 and Raiola number 2, but that's irrelevant because no one asked me for my opinion on rankings. That's unfortunate,
Yeah.
Mika Hanna asks, are we in on Ernest Willer? I actually talked to Ernest a little bit on Wednesday. Said there is conversation happening with Ohio State. They're looking at him as a 3-tech in this defense, and that he is hoping to make an official visit, but has not scheduled one yet for this fall. And so for me, until a player actually commits to a date, it means nothing. So that's where things are. So Aaron Nolan moves up. A lot of Ohio State talent is getting bumped in the rankings. I think we saw when Rivals.com released their new 5-stars on Tuesday. There are 4 Ohio State players that are committed that are 5-stars, correct? Nolan, Smith, Mylan Graham.
And then Mylan Graham. I don't think Mylan Graham is a 5-star, or maybe he is now. I can't remember.
Did I get it wrong? I know that the Buckeyes are in a position to. Let me see here if I can find it. This is really good live entertainment for people as they.
Justin Scott, obviously.
Yeah.
I think maybe Graham still is. He might still be 1. He might be 20 or something. I can't remember.
Jeremiah Smith is number 2. Justin Scott is number 8. Aaron Nolan is number 20. Mylan Graham is number 27, but he's not a 5-star yet. But if Ohio State ends up landing Eddrick Houston, then they'll be 5. So, they're on the borderline of 5 stars, which is pretty good. Let's move to the next portion of the show, Andrew, in the class of 2025, which we spend so much time talking about the 2024 class, but we're actually probably more deeply into the 25 class right now than we're really spending time on. Big news for Ohio State on Tuesday when Nate Robertson, the country's number 2 tight end from Oklahoma, decommitted from Notre Dame. He committed to the Irish 1 week after visiting Ohio State in June. And the Buckeyes were really bummed when that happened because they thought that they had put themselves in a position to be a longtime contender for Roberts, 6'4", 230 pounds, and tons of family in the Pickerington area, Reynoldsburg, down in West Virginia. His dad's from Norman, Oklahoma, however, and he does live in Oklahoma. But then the decommitment from Notre Dame happens a month and a half after, 2 months after committing, and Ohio State is in a really good spot. I know from just, it means nothing because we talk about what kids wear doesn't really matter, but he first day of school wearing an Ohio State shirt on the day he decommitted from Notre Dame. So take that as a sign of something good if you want. I expect him to visit Ohio State in late September, and the Buckeyes are definitely going to be in that group. That's going to be probably an Ohio State-Oklahoma battle moving forward. And it took forever for Ohio State to land 2 tight ends in a class. They are on track to sign 2 in the class of 2024 with Max LeBlanc and Demarion Witten. And if they can land Nate Roberts, which again, I'm not going to say it's like a done deal, but I think you like your chances of 50-50 fight right now. The Ohio State offense versus the Oklahoma offense. I'd probably think most people would take the Ohio State offense. Then I think you would still see Ohio State try to find a second tight end in the class of 2025. And in some ways, I think they'd actually let Roberts have a say in that and say, hey, Luka Gilbert's in the state. He's 6'7", 225 pounds. There's Amari Winston down in Georgia. There's a couple other guys around the country that the Buckeyes and Keenan Bailey are pretty close on. So you just let them vibe and see who that best fit is with. So I like that. I love our class of 24, but the D-line linebacker having 1 commit each is a little thin so far. Troy, Ohio State does have 2 linebackers committed with Peyton Pierce and Garrett Stover. But yes, there's no doubt the defensive line needs help. Andrew, obviously, it seems like at times that we're not paying attention to 25 because there's so much drama and theatrics in the class of 2024. But have you like found a player or two in the class of 2025 that you're enamored with like you normally do?
Yeah. The Texas cornerback. What's his name? His dad's been in the chat.
Devin Sanchez.
Yeah. He's probably number one on the list for me. I think Alabama, Ohio State both seem to be positioned pretty well there, but he's kind of, if I had to put together my own little personal big board right now, he might be number one on the list for me. Definitely up there.
That's one of those ones where you wish you could just speed up time because, like, and I know people hate when I say it, but if he had to choose today, it would almost certainly be Ohio State. But he doesn't have to choose today. He doesn't have to choose today.
I think what I'm interested in the most maybe for 2025 is just those running back dominoes and kind of what's going to fall there, because there's 3 or 4 guys that Ohio State's either in the lead for or top 2 for. Jordan Davison being another one from California. Texas is involved there too. Jordan Davison, right?
And Byron Lewis down in Florida, Marquise Davis, Bo Jackson at home. It's a good class. Tony Alford's done a great job getting involved, but like, if you can get a Jordan Davison early, then do you need another running back in that class? I don't know. Like, that becomes weird.
Yeah, I don't know. I just wonder. I wonder if something could happen on that front relatively, not like soon, but maybe sooner than some other position groups, just because the 2024 class is pretty much done now, obviously with 2.5 committed, depending on how you view Sam Williams-Dixon. Yep. But yeah.
Let's see. Greg asks, how would Carter Lowe compare in this cycle? Armstrong-like talent or higher ceiling? Carter Lowe is a top 100 player and would be in the class of 2024 as well. His frame is really good. He's a longtime basketball player, 6'6", 295 pounds. He's, if you're talking in-state priorities for class of 2025, since Tavian St. Clair is already committed, Carter Lowe and Dorian Brew are your must-gets in that class, and Justin Fry and Mike Soleni are working extremely hard on Carter Lowe. That will be involved with Michigan and the SEC. So Georgia, Alabama, Michigan. That's going to be the battle for sure. Yeah, Troy, 247 has Stover as a safety. Yeah, sometimes people just don't update those things, even though everyone knows he's going to play linebacker. I don't know why. Is it too early to talk about Jackson Smith, the freshman QB starting for Lakota West this year? Greg, yeah, probably, because he hasn't played a game yet, and he's a freshman. So let's see how he fares on Friday night in his first action as a high school player and go from there. But he's a good player. I've seen him throw, and he definitely has some juice to him. Moving on. Speaking of in-state quarterbacks and people wondering, like, were you surprised, Andrew, that Ryan Montgomery did not have Ohio State in his top
5? Not really. I really wasn't. And I don't think it really matters either, because it's not a final 5. It's just a top 5. He's got plenty of good options. He's going to go and play his college football for a national championship contending team, a big program. And if Ohio State continues to recruit him and something goes awry, or they decide they want 2 guys in the class, I don't think Ohio State is out of it by any means. But I wasn't really surprised when he came out with his list and Ohio State wasn't on it, just because of obviously Tavian St. Clair already being committed at the position. So, yeah,
it's actually pretty not funny, but it's telling with the recruitment of Ryan Montgomery. In that top 5, none of them have a quarterback committed. And the top 5 actually changed a couple of times in the last week, because Miami and Purdue were both going to be in the initial top 5, and then they picked up commitments for 2025 quarterbacks in the last week. And so then you saw other schools get added, Penn State getting themselves back onto the list, as like Stone Saunders, the kid from Pennsylvania who committed to Kentucky, like kind of opened the door there. It's Michigan, it's Penn State, it's Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina for Ryan Montgomery. And as Andrew said, like, this isn't over for him in Ohio State, but when Tavian St. Clair committed, it became pretty apparent at that point that there was going to be a split and that Ryan Montgomery was going to end up somewhere else. The Buckeyes have and will keep the door open for him to say, if you want in the class, you are in the class. We will not say no. So they would welcome a second quarterback in that class and then let those guys compete it out at the next level. Right now, that's clearly not what Ryan Montgomery is looking for. And you almost have to give the kid some credit for being that resolute in the process and say, hey, I know what I want. I know what I think I deserve. And I think that if I had to handicap it right now, I would say South Carolina is probably the team that I would put as the favorite. It's interesting to me to see what Michigan does, because obviously they are back in the fight pretty heavily with Bryce Underwood, the number 1 ranked quarterback in the country in the class and from Belleville, Michigan. Whereas 3 months ago, I don't think Michigan really thought they had any shot there, but now they feel confident that they do. I don't know, and this is, I think, the risk that a player like Ryan Montgomery and any quarterback is going to take by waiting now that these dominoes have begun to fall is, would Michigan say yes? I don't know if they would, and that's the challenge. Like, I think they would tell him they would, but I don't know if they really would. And like, that makes this next couple months pretty important for Ryan.
Yeah, from what I've read from the Michigan side, it makes it sound like that they are not willing to say yes to anybody right now except for Underwood. But I mean, I know that stuff changes day to day sometimes, so who knows?
Yeah. Joe Harn, could Ohio State hire a D-line coach and Larry Johnson as an analyst? They could. I don't know if they will, Joe. That sort of would depend on whether or not the NCAA opens up the coaching staff and allows for more players. There has been some discussion about when Larry does retire about being a pass rush analyst / specialist, so he can still be on campus, still recruit on campus, still work with players and recruits when they're in town at camps and stuff like that, but not necessarily be counted on to be out on the road. And it'll be interesting to see if the NCAA changes their mind on that. I think they're a little bit concerned that if you have unlimited coaching spots, that programs like Ohio State, Alabama, et cetera, would have 30 coaches and other schools would have 10. And so they're not really into that idea. Dave, is Michigan, where is Harbaugh going to be after this year? I think he's going to still be at Michigan. But I do know that it's weird. Michigan is very much struggling on the recruiting trail right now after a pretty dynamic couple months. You lose your top receiver prospect to Boise State a week ago. Then you get a flip from Elias Rudolph, the Cincinnati native who was playing in Florida last year, but back in Cincinnati now, committed to Michigan in July, then flips to Miami. Jared and Jacob Smith, the defensive linemen who played in Connecticut, but now are back in Kentucky where they're from, are likely to flip to Kentucky. There's some debate going on around Dominic Nichols, one of their other defensive linemen, about him potentially flipping to either Clemson or Wisconsin. Like, there's a lot of stuff swirling. And I think a lot of that is basically because Michigan is gearing up to try to over-recruit those guys anyway, in some way, shape, or form. But some of it is just that the NIL stuff at Michigan has been behind. And while they're starting to right that ship, they are behind. And then you couple that with all of the conversation about Jim Harbaugh, and not the suspension stuff, but the fact is that people look at this season in Ann Arbor and think it's a potential national championship season there, the first, potential outright national title since 1948 or something. And knowing how much talent they stand to lose after this year, knowing the NCAA could come down on him harder next year because they have not reached an agreement on a suspension, knowing that he has spent the last 5 years trying to get out of town, I think people reasonably assume that he won't be there, but I feel like he probably still will be.
Yeah, things have changed a lot over the last 2 months or so when Michigan was landing a bunch of guys, and I think they had close to the number 1 class in America, or right up there. Yeah. Maybe it was some people thought they were going to get Aaron Scott and Bryce West, and now they're losing kids to Boise State and probably Kentucky here soon, and things have changed. So
it is funky. Let's go to the 4-minute offense here. We'll try to answer a few more questions from the chat if I can read them here. There's a lot coming in. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a beautiful Wednesday night. I don't know if you're watching the Reds and Guardians, but if somebody can give me a score on that, that'd be cool. It was 1-0 last I saw.
5-2 Reds.
Okay. Tristan Croft. What about a priority wide receiver for 2025? Ironically, as good as Brian Hartline has been, like, it's weird that there isn't really a target yet in the class of 2025 that I would say is the main guy for him in that class. The one player that I think was at the top of that list is DeCorian Moore from Texas. He committed to LSU over the weekend. And I'm of the mindset right now, Andrew, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree. unless it's a player like Tavian St. Clair in the state of Ohio, unless it's a player committing in Texas to Texas or, in Georgia to Georgia. And even that seems out the window if you look at the Jaden Perlotti commitment, who, as he's potentially flipping to Florida State. Like, I don't care if a player commits right now. Like, it means virtually nothing if a kid is committed in the class of 2025 at this point. Like, we're entering the twilight zone of recruiting where it means zilch if a kid is committed this far out in advance.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I think didn't Heartline really like that Jamie French kid too that committed to Alabama? Wasn't he another one that was up there on the list?
Yeah, those are the two that I think would have been 1 and 2, Decory Moore and French. But other than that, like, there hasn't been anything. I don't know if there's any discussion. I don't want it to start that I'm saying that's a discussion, but we do live in a different time now. And I wouldn't be shocked if there's at least a thought for Chris Henry Jr. to try to reclassify and get into the class of 2025. That's, again, I have not heard that speculated by anyone, but like, if you try to forecast out what could happen, I would not be shocked if that happened. I know that Keith says Quentin Simmons Jr. will be in the 25 class. I don't know about that. I mean, he camped this summer and didn't get an offer, so he's going to have to come back or really show out this season for Withrow. So you have not a lot of other kids in the state that are really at that level in the class of 2025. So it is going to be interesting. Jordan Butler, what's going on with Zaquan Patterson? Was he wait and see what happens with KJ Bolden? He was never wait and see what happens with KJ Bolden. They would have loved to take them both. He did visit in June. He had a great visit, and then conversation hasn't been as good, according to people I've talked to. Not because they haven't tried to have it. It's just been a little bit spotty at times. And Ohio State is expecting to have him on campus for an official visit in the fall. And if you get him there, then you get a chance. I think Florida State is the dark horse there. Obviously, Michigan is very involved. Miami as well.
I think I read something about his school, like trying to have him commit like next week or something for some reason. Might have been the same day as the Houston commitment. That just seemed kind of weird. And if he does commit next week, it seems like that's going to be very much not the end of the recruiting process for him. I don't know.
I haven't heard that, but again, a lot of these kids in the class of 2024 are trying to commit before the season starts. And I think some of the schools like Chaminade, Madonna High School, like, they want their seniors to be committed so they don't have to worry about this crap during the season. But then they say, okay, I have to commit. I'm going to pick somewhere, but I'm still going to make visits and I'm still going to potentially change my mind. So again, it's like, what does it matter? So, any word on safeties for the 24 class? Andrew Dirk, that's pretty much the only update right now. I mean, I mentioned it on a story on ohiostate.rivals.com last week that I think Ohio State should make an effort to reconnect with Bronte Johnson from Fort Wayne, Indiana, committed to Notre Dame, who has now decided he's going to be a defensive back. And since he's made that decision, I personally feel like Ohio State should go after him. He is a big, lanky, rangy, super freaky athlete that can make a big difference. He's basically best friends with Mylan Graham, and I think you have at least a shot to get him on campus and have a conversation with him. Ohio State goes into South Bend on September 24th and blows the doors off of the Irish. Maybe you can get in his ear and say, hey, you're in the wrong spot. But
some of Pereliano's recent Twitter activity kind of makes me think that they're definitely sniffing around there. So, yeah, I mean, none of it matters until he visits or whatever, but yeah,
they absolutely should. And we'll see what happens. Anything else here? We should be getting an Jordan Butler. We already talked about Jordan Seaton a little bit earlier, but Buckeyes are in it, and they're going to get him on campus for an official visit in October. And then it's going to be about NIL and how high are you willing to go? How far are you going to go? Nashawn Montgomery, that is another 2025 receiver Ohio State has offered and really liked. So thank you, Rizzo, for bringing that up. Justin Hill is a must get. Justin Hill's an interesting recruitment. 2025 linebacker from Winton Woods High School in Ohio. Obviously a school that's been pretty good to the Buckeyes in the recent years. There's family members in the Justin Hill circle that are huge Alabama fans, and they really want him to go to Alabama. So it's not going to be, that's not a clear-cut victory for Ohio State. That's going to require some big-time recruiting effort by James Laurinaitis and Jim Knowles. Perfect fit for the jack position I also remain a huge fan of Dante McClellan at Canton McKinley in the class of 2025. I think he's going to be really, really good. Did Elias Rudolph decommit from Michigan? Yes, he did. He flipped to Miami. Let's see. Trey McNutt is another must-get in the state. I agree, and I think Ohio State will eventually land Trey McNutt. Obviously, a Buckeyes legacy there. So, Andrew, I don't have a lot else. I could talk about whatever. We should have a commitment decision from Dominic McKinley in the next 2 weeks, I'd imagine. Again, not that it's anything new. We started talking about this a few weeks ago, and now we've seen Ohio State at least linked to him more often in the national recruiting scene. Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Texas seem to be the three that are feeling the best there. Texas sources I talked to are like adamant he's going to Texas, but I don't know about that.
There's a couple quick ones from the forum if you want me to hit you with those. So the Brutus Buck asked about like some of the recent misses, obviously Bolden, Dylan Stewart, Lightfoot. Like, is there a reason to hold our breaths for some of those more than others? I assume Lightfoot's kind of the one we've talked the most about Ohio State getting back in on. Obviously, Miami's got all kinds of stuff going on with John Ruiz and the NIL money and him being sued for millions and millions of dollars. So I guess what are your thoughts on some of those recent misses and just keeping an eye on those ones over the next few months?
I don't think the Bolden one is going to happen unless Florida State just collapses, which seems unlikely. They're like a program on the rise, and they're going to be very aggressive here. They're going to have an offense that's a lot of fun and score a lot of points, and I think that one's pretty much over. They'll still maintain the relationship and still keep in contact, but it would take something significant for that to change. Dylan Stewart is not a kid who ever liked to talk to anyone to begin with. I think once he made his decision, I think it's done. South Carolina was the presumptive favorite for a while until after his Ohio State official visit. And then when that, came back to the mean, South Carolina rose again. So I'm going to stay with South Carolina. I do think the Marquise Lightfoot one is worth watching. Obviously, Miami's program continues to be in a little state of flux. And I think that Marquise Lightfoot is a really good example of a player betting on himself and saying to, the college football world, I think I'm worth more than you think I'm worth. And now I'm going to go get it. And then he gets it. And then Ohio State, after missing on Dylan Stewart, probably has to readjust and recalibrate their own perception in order to get him. And so that could end up working in Lightfoot's favor. Bottom line, I don't think he's going to take any visits unless he decommits. So that's the rub. So the Buckeyes will keep the conversation going. There was some discussion about whether or not Larry Johnson had slowed down in that recruitment. The Buckeyes are in full-on season prep now. Every coach is slowing down a little bit. Larry Johnson, who's already a little bit less over the top when it comes to communication, will probably feel even more pulled back than other coaches would. But Larry and the Buckeyes will continue to be in contact there. But at this point, you have to almost wait for Lightfoot to say, I'm ready to decommit, and then you ramp things up, because otherwise you're sort of just wasting your breath.
Yep, that makes sense. Last one, Day Era 20 asked about class size. Right now, Ohio State's got 20 commitments. Is 24 to 26 kind of still that magic number? Probably on the higher end of that if you can get a guy like Seton or flip a couple guys or whatever, but is that the safe bet?
Yeah, if you look at it now, let's take a look at the big board. On offense, there are really only two offensive linemen that you're still going after, in Jordan Seton and Brandon Baker. You are looking at potentially adding a fourth wide receiver. So provided you get everyone you want, it's at least feasible that Ohio State then is at 23. Let's just assume they get everyone they want. So how high are they willing to go on the class size versus how high they actually go is going to be dependent on how these recruitments go. But that takes you to 23. You add Eddrick Houston potentially, that's 24. If you get Dominic McKinley, that's 25. You would still like to add one or two other defensive ends. That's 26 to 27. And then you're looking at another safety. So that's potentially 28. If everything broke exactly how they wanted, they would be willing to go that high. Or if it goes to 22, 23, then you supplement that with the transfer portal.
And you got to hold a couple spots in case there's like coaching changes that shake up recruitments down the road and stuff like that too. So yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Lots of things can happen between now and then, and we'll try our best to talk about it on Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast on the podcast. Really do appreciate you guys joining us. that's pretty much it for the evening. Hopefully we can get a little more consistent with this as the season hits and we have actual recruiting news to talk about, visits, etc. But right now we're in full-on preseason prep mode, and the Buckeyes are not focused as much on recruiting, but all eyes will be on Eddrick Houston next Tuesday. We will have a talking stuff next Tuesday night, regardless, one way or the other, to talk about the decision and everything else that's happened between now and then. For Andrew, I'm Jeremy. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe. If you're not already on a subscriber basis with the podcast, you should probably just hit that button. And, you know, we don't do this for our fun. I mean, it is fun, but we don't do it for y'all. I just said y'all, and I've never said y'all before, but I didn't really like it. Didn't really feel like me. I'll work on a different, sign off over the weekend. Goodbye.